Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Q&A event for Weaving Worlds, Indigenous Traditions and Western Psychotherapy. We're really glad to have you all with us. Thank you so much. This is our Patreon community, and folks are really supporting the Psychedelic Seminars project, and in particular, this episode. So we are, on behalf of the whole project and the team that's worked on this, thank you so much for being here. So I see in the chat, people are sharing where you're coming from. Feel free to throw in where you're at. Quickly to introduce who we all are. My name is Kat Ho. I'm from the Psychedelic Seminars team. For this episode, I worked on the translations and subtitling for both English and Spanish. So really glad to be able to bring this to two language-speaking audiences. We also have, of course, with us for our Q&A, Françoise and Ismail. So I'd love for them to give a quick introduction themselves. So welcome in everyone who's just joining right now. And why don't you introduce yourself, Françoise, quickly for anyone who didn't maybe catch the video yet.
Sure. Thank you. Thank you for everyone for being here and joining us on this exciting moment of Q&A. So my name is Françoise Bourzat. I'm a somatic counselor. I am adjunct faculty at CIIS. I'm a COMI-trained counselor, and my interest has been in psychedelics for over 30 years. I have been lucky to study and apprentice and be associated with wonderful mentors, and especially, which is the topic of today, the Mazatec tradition of Mexico, more specifically Huautla de Jimenez in the state of Oaxaca. And I've had the great fortune to study and apprentice with Julieta Casimiro Estrada, who passed away 2 years ago. And for 20 years, I was with her collaborating and working on ceremonies, as well as, immersing myself into her culture and continuing to do so with her family and her daughters now. And Eugenia, whom you have seen in the, the actual interview with Izzy, is Julieta's daughter, with whom I'm continuing to collaborate in the family there.
Thank you so much. And Izzy?
Thank you.
Hi, everyone. Happy Sunday. Thank you, Kat, for hosting and for facilitating this conversation. And thank you, Françoise, for being here. It's always such a pleasure to be in conversation with you. There's so many deep things to talk about and inquire about and engage with. So I'm really honored and grateful to be continuing this conversation. Hi, everybody. My name is Ismail Lodido Ali. I am an attorney, an educator, an advocate, focusing on how to bring these powerful modalities, whether it's from the substance to the practice to the tradition, into the world in a way that's in alignment and integrity. So I work with kind of the legal and political infrastructure of how some of these medicines are brought forward. And I currently work primarily as policy and advocacy counsel at the Multidisciplinary Association for Psychedelic Studies, lovingly known as MAPS. And I also work with a few other organizations in the area, like Students for Sensible Drug Policy and Chacruna and the Ayahuasca Defense Fund. So I'm super happy to be here. I'm excited to be kind of diving into this conversation because I think it pulls in a number of themes that have been really kind of percolating under the surface for quite some time, decades even, and I think that are really coming up to the surface as we enter a different paradigm with the medicine and with these powerful modalities. So happy to be here.
Thanks very much. It looks like we have folks from all over the world here. I see someone from Peru, Vermont, Colorado, and Canada. I'm in Berkeley, California, on Ohlone land. Where are you two dialing in from? Izzy and Françoise, where are you at?
I'm dialing from Woodside, California.
I'm about a mile away from you, Kat. Berkeley, California, Ohlone land.
Right.
Happy to be here.
Awesome. So just for anyone who's new on Crowdcast, there is a button on the bottom of the screen that says ask a question. And there should be a little number next to it on the number of questions we have. And if you have a question, please go ahead and go there and throw it in there. And the sooner you do, the sooner that anyone else can also vote on those questions. So even if you don't know what to ask, feel free, please go. I invite you to go there, click the button, take a minute to read what others have asked, and upvote anything that you'd like to see us discuss today. And we can prioritize things that people are voting on. And while you do that, I will also I want to make a quick announcement, which is that after the event today, we are planning to do sort of an experiment with this platform called AirMeet. We're going to share a link at the end of the event for anyone who wants to just connect with everyone else who's come here today. We like providing an opportunity to connect with community. I will be joining that gathering, just an informal social thing, and also Mike Margulies from the Psychedelic Seminars project will also be there. So we'd love to just hang out with you in the lobby, as we call it, in our virtual lobby space. And there's the link there for you to check it out in advance if you'd like to. All right, looks like we have at least another extra question here. Thank you very much. If you think of any questions along the way, go ahead and to the bottom of your screen, hit ask a question and throw it in there at any point, and we'll be checking it as we go. All right, it looks like we have a clear top question so far. So let's just kick this off. Something that I'm going to be doing is we're going to try, and hopefully the internet gods are kind, to invite you. If you ask the question, we'll invite you to come on screen and ask it. If you are feeling shy or not camera ready, you don't have to do it. I'll ask it for you. But I want to give people an opportunity, if you ask the question, to join us on screen and ask us up here. So let's just start with that very first one. We have a question from Karen J. Karen, are you here? And can you, looks like you're here from Vermont, actually. Would you like to come on screen? I'll give you a few seconds. And if you don't want to, just throw in the chat that you'd rather me ask. Great. Welcome, Karen.
Hi. First, just let me say thank you so much. The interview, the conversation was amazing. And I also just started reading Consciousness Medicine, and it's incredible. Just so much of it is resonating with me and the journey I've been on. So just so much gratitude. Thank you. And my question, I'm just curious to hear more about dosage in terms of the Mazatec tradition, and if there are different amounts for different things, or does it depend on the person? I would just love to hear anything you could share about that.
Well, thank you for the sweet words, first of all, and welcome. Yes, the Mazatecs have, according to my observation and dialogue with them, of course, that's what I've gathered over time with them, is that there's a lot of titration of dosage according to the presenting issue that they come to be doctored for, or the previous experience that people have had. And if the guide, the curandera, knows the person that comes to work with them, if the first time, they probably will have a very minimal dose, the equivalent probably of 2 grams. I mean, everything is on fresh mushrooms, so it's a different weight, but I'm just saying that for our reference point. So a lighter dose is generally preferred for a beginning and an evaluation of the situation and how the person will journey, how the person will relate to that expanded states and to the effect of the medicine. Some people have never taken anything and they arrive there. So, it can be an initiation for some people. So there's many different variables for which the dosage will be titrated and adjusted. I've gone there many, many times, of course, and I've taken fairly high doses sometimes in different sequence. There's a beginning, and then there's an adjustment, and then even more after. So I have taken fairly high doses of medicine there, the equivalent probably of, 5, 6, 7 grams, which are very high doses and are not recommended at all for beginners, but these are doses for experienced journeyers with a strong relationship, so that was something that grew over time and was specifically designed for what she was thinking was going on with me and what was needed for my healing and expansion. There is also a minimal dosing. I don't know if it's called a microdosing per se, but a small dose that is used for prayer and for slowing down and for meditating, that is also used there. Mhm.
Great. Thank you so much for that question,
Thank you.
Karen.
Thank you, Karen. Thank you.
So I did want to make a quick note that I should have made just a little bit earlier. And sorry, Karen, about this. We are recording this episode because Crowdcast automatically records all their events. And so we would love to be able to replay this for other patrons that didn't catch this today. So I hope it's okay that it's being recorded. That's kind of how Crowdcast works. So when we bring you on screen, you will be recorded for a minute while you're here. And please, let us know if there's an issue with that and we can work around it.
That's fine.
Great, thank you. All right, so looks like folks are throwing in more questions. So let's go to the next one that was asked. Let me see, there's one with 2 votes. Oh, yes, please get in there and vote so we can see what folks are interested in. All right, so let's do this one that has 2 votes down here from Megan about what it's been like to weave these worlds. Megan, I'm not sure if I'm saying that correctly. Megan, are you available and would you like to jump on screen? Give you a few seconds to do that.
Are there yet? Hi.
Hi, welcome.
Hi, first of all,
I know her.
Thanks to Mike. Yes, thank you. And I so appreciate this platform and all of you taking time and effort to
Yes, by the way,
create
fire in
space for
Colorado.
conversation around it. So I really appreciate it.
Hey.
Mike, I'll just read my question straight up, but I have a follow-up specific to Izzy. So hang tight while I walk through this. Françoise, you've been weaving Western psychology and indigenous traditions since you started your work, I believe, and have a beautiful, very organic story how you walked in. And it feels so safe and like authentic and how that occurred. So I have a deep appreciation for things that just unfold when they sort of come from the field, where they come from how we respond to when we're called to something, even when we don't have a clue about why we do. So I'm wondering what it was like for you to begin that weave, like to be taken in by a family as you described and as Eugenia appreciated, and to begin to learn their ways. And what it was like to bring Westerners to that setting, and then what you've learned, and then what it was like to bring them here in this context. So you were changing containers and settings and holding the integrity of ancient wisdom. So I'd love to hear what that's been like and what advice you have for those of us impatiently waiting for the opportunity to do this.
So it looks like the sound is a little bit crackly coming from Megan. So did you hear that, Françoise, the question?
Yes, I heard.
Great.
I heard. Yeah. And hi, Megan. Megan is a good friend of mine, so I'm happy to see your face. It's an interesting, well, I don't know, it's my story, I guess. I don't know if it's interesting or not, but it just happened that someone took me there to meet Julieta. I had not planned on looking for a teacher. I had some teachers that were very wonderful in my life in this work, and Native people, Indigenous people already who had crossed my path and had decided to teach me some of what they were doing. My teacher Pablo Sanchez, especially here in the Bay Area, who is a Native American and Mexican. So when I was invited to meet Julieta, I didn't even know she existed. So someone said, I want to bring you to this woman. You need to meet her. So I was taken there and I met her, and I was very shy, and not shy, but very hesitant in asking anything of her and being demanding of her. I just was lucky enough to sit in ceremonies with her and felt very blessed by this incredible opportunity. And there was nothing I wanted from her, really. But I remember, so I spent a week with her and we did a lot of work and that was wonderful. And I just felt lucky with that. And then I told her, I said, I want to bring my family to you so you can meet my family. And so I brought my kids, my husband, and we went to spend some time for her to know my family. I just felt it was important. And so we did that. And my little 5-year-old was playing soccer in the soccer field with the other kids. And my daughter was, I don't know, we were just like in the family. And then we went back. I started to go back and bring some friends of mine and slowly really earned her trust and the trust of the family. And then I invited her to my house with her husband. So they came to California and we obtained visa for them. And it was a big ordeal and to get visas. And I think the demonstration of trust and commitment and dedication to the connecting with them and their family and my family was really obvious, and it was really, generous on both sides, very much. And so her family, her children, their children, realized that we were really taking care of their parents well. And that was a big deal for the kids to know how entrusted we were with the well-being of their parents. And we showed them a very good time in California. And then I took, then her husband died, and I took her to Israel, to the footstep of Jesus, which was a very big ordeal for her. And we did a pilgrimage. I mean, the things I offered her because I loved her, and what she offered me because she loved me was really how we weaved our connection. There was not about, are we weaving an indigenous tradition with a psychotherapeutic tradition? We were just connecting on very personal level. But through that personal weave, we exchanged a lot. I talked to her about my work. She talked to me about her work, about her past, about her connection with Maria Sabina, with her family, her parents, her mentor, who was her husband's mother, Regina Carrera Calvo, very powerful midwife and herbalist and mushroom curandera. And so that was the way we have connecting. So I guess that through our personal connection, our knowledge and where we came from started to come closer and started to interface. And this weaving has happened over time and over many conversations and over dialogues and over trust, really. At the beginning, she wouldn't have me touch anybody that I would bring there. She would work with them and she would tell me, you sit here and you watch. And of course I would, right? I mean, and then at some point she said, go work with that one. You go work with that one. And this is your people. And then she would say, these are your people. You know how much medicine they need, which was a huge shift from her deciding, I'm giving them what I think I'm giving them. And so slowly, by not wanting anything, I received, right? I received and people received amazing intuition and knowledge from her. And over time, I told her more about how we study psychology. What does that mean to look at trauma? What does it mean to look at family system? What does it mean to look at social class and money? And how is the treatment happening in our society when someone goes to see a therapist, and how does that look like? She was curious, and her family was curious, and her daughter is very curious about that. And so I think that she got to understand the value of our approach towards psychology, also valuing the narrative, touch with emotions, the reflection that we can have on our life. That I think all this has been really fruitful to her, I believe, to her work over the years, and also to her daughters now continuing this work. And then, of course, we have received a tremendous amount of transmission and knowledge and ways and techniques and approach that is, extremely, extremely precious to this field, really, and how generously it was offered to us.
Yeah. Megan points out in the chat here that it sounds like relationship building was a huge important aspect of that.
Yes, it was really about that. The exchange and the cross-pollination of these two approaches really happened through the relationship, through the love, through the trust, through the respect, and yeah, the ongoing connection that we had for over 20 years. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I love how that highlights that person to person, the importance of that person to person connection to weave worlds.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Mm-hmm. Yes. Mm-hmm.
Great. Well, let's go to our next question. At the top, we have 3 votes for questions someone wrote in earlier from Liliana Dimes. Is Liliana available and interested in coming on screen to ask their question? And, oh, all right. Thanks, Liliana, for the chat message. Lots of background noise there. So I'll go ahead and read the question. So some critics talk about sexual misconduct and others defend the healing power of psychedelic sex. Do you think it can be healing to engage in sexual activity in this work? If so, what does it look like to do that well? And if not, how do we address these kinds of ethical issues as a community? And either one of you feel free to jump in.
Yeah, well, I don't know, Izzy, you have, I'm happy to talk about it, but I want to leave you to
No, actually, I would actually
you know,
appreciate if you answered whatever you feel like answering. I have opinions, but I'd actually really be curious about hearing your perspective, and also maybe after can speak a little bit more about the ethics, because that's probably where I've spent more time thinking.
Okay, great. So I think in the Mazatec tradition, sexual activity between two people is completely forbidden within the framework of this work, because it is said that sexual activity, how could I say that, brings two people energetically together, so much so that it's hard for the journey, for the unfolding of this space of the work to really be clear, and for the person who journeys to have clear tracking or clear remembrance or clear understanding of what has taken place in the journey. It's about energetic integrity of the person going into ceremony. It's not about a morality or anything like this. It's about being, what they say, clean, but when they say clean, they mean energetically clean. Just like they don't want people to drink alcohol, or they don't want people to do other drugs before journey. They don't want people to do sex, because it's a matter of clarity, and it's a matter of integrity of personal energy and clean slate, so to speak, on which to put a medicine. So that's the Mazatec approach. Now, the Mazatecs are really clear that the awakening of someone's sensuality, or healing someone's erotic personal energy during a journey, is very much part of what happens. It's part of the process, right? Just like someone can get angry, just like someone can get about laughing hysterically, just like someone can be disoriented and touch some place of fear. Touching a place of vitality and erotic energy is part of the process, and it's not judged. The Mazatecs actually are quite having a lot of fun and joking about sexual stuff and like seducing, and I mean, they're very, very uninhibited, actually. Once you know them, they can crack jokes about that all the time. It's quite funny, actually, Julieta included. And so it's not a morality issue here. It's not a Puritan. It's not about being Puritan at all. It's really about the clarity of the work. So that being said, in our Western approach, there are approaches that are valid, that are important, that are very precious to address trauma that is healed, covering vitality and erotic energy through tantric work, sexual therapy with people trained in the process of reawakening orgasmic response, sensual awareness, expressive aspect of their physical and sensual life, right? So I think it's a good idea for people to have places to go to that are supporting this awakening. I know personally a couple of people who are trained in that way, who have been trained to do hands-on work, who have a contract with their clients who come to them specifically for this treatment, right? For what they proclaim on their website or on their, shingle, right? And these people also have experience with psychedelics, and they feel that it might be fruitful to expand the body through a light dose of some medicine to open the field of the sensual access. Now, I think that if they have a contract and if they have a clear agreement with their people, it's everyone's skill. If I do a sound healing during a medicine journey, or if I touch someone to massage the belly or the shoulders, when I work with someone with Eugenia or before with Julieta, I'm touching people in a non-sexual way, but I'm applying a skill that I have as a body worker and as a someone who knows touch well, and that's valid, right? So some people who have a specific kind of touch that can be reawakening the body, I think it's not a sexual relationship. It's not a sexual relationship. It's a sexual healing. That's a very different thing. When a practitioner dispenses a specific skill to a client, let's say we call a journeyer, that's not a relationship. That's not a mutual sexual relationship. That's a treatment. And I'm okay with that. I'm okay with that. I mean, again, it's all about training. It's all about technique. It's all about professional boundaries, and it's all about contract and consent. In this context, I don't think there is it's good or bad. I think it's about a choice and a professional accountability and engagement and clarity with the person, the two people involved.
Thank you, Françoise, for that very wise download. And this is a really good and complex question. And I feel like the way that it gets answered depends a lot on the container that we're talking about. So first, I just want to agree with a lot of the things that you said. I think like the distinction between a mutual or non-mutual sexual relationship and a treatment is a really important one, because like it kind of, for me, has to do with the energetic directionality of where the intention and desired outcome are coming from. And to me, we talk a little bit in our original interview about the role of the guide and the role of the container. And to me, when I think about like consent, for example, this comes up a lot in the medicine work, where it's like, how much are you able to consent in a state of trauma? How much are you able to consent under the influence of a substance? How much are you able to consent when you're in the integration phase? So it's not just about like how clear-headed are you, but I think what you were saying around like the actual agreements that are determined prior to any given experience, really like from an ethical perspective, really to guide. It's generally considered pretty out of integrity to be changing agreements or boundaries in the midst of an experience. Those are all things that you really want to be negotiating ahead of time. Do I think it's possible for sexual experiences and psychedelic experiences to overlap in a way that is healing for people? Of course, and absolutely. And I think those initial pieces around the container, the guide, the consent, and what role one person is playing, and what role everyone in the group understands each person is playing, I think is really critical to make sure that it's actually done in a way that's safe. I like what you said, Françoise, a lot about energetic integrity and differentiating that from morality. I think that, can I imagine like a Star Trek future where people are sexually liberated and like out of like coercive power dynamic environments where like people can just be in their like post-gender space communism utopia bubble? Like, I can imagine that, yes, with all the psychedelics, but I think that a big part of this has also to do with the level of spiritual maturity that a society is at. And I think as long as we look at sex through this kind of moralistic framework, it's actually hard to break through to a more kind of nuanced understanding of this, which is what worries me about how, when we talk about sex and healing in the Western psychotherapeutic paradigm, the numbers are pretty appalling. You know, a huge number of psychotherapists and other kind of counselors end up engaging in sexual practice with their clients out of integrity with the code of ethics. And that issue is something that's already endemic to like the Western healing tradition in some cases. Obviously, it's not like outrageous, but it's a much higher number than it really needs to be. And obviously, any number higher than 0 is inappropriate. So the fact that we're starting from that point makes me not skeptical, but certainly cautious about the way that these things get interwoven. And I think there's a big difference from a power dynamic perspective from when like, you know, there's a couple or a group of people who are intentionally engaging to explore or to do healing work with each other versus like a guide or a facilitator or a teacher who's then leading something. So I think that the underlying piece here has to do with both this like integrity and maturity and also these power dynamic questions. And to me, the issue is not the sex, it's the power dynamics and like how power dynamics are seen in relation to the activity. So I do think that from an ethical perspective, I mean, I'll just give an example, like with, because like, for example, the MDMA code of ethics that we're using for the therapists at MAPS is working within a more, maybe I would say moralistic Western psychotherapeutic paradigm. Like the boundaries that we set within our code of ethics are very strict. Because of our awareness that like these boundaries get abused all the time. I think that to your point, and you were even talking about this earlier, Françoise, about the family integration piece, that's another big difference that I think is actually quite relevant here, because when your dynamic around doing healing work in circles or in ceremonies is a family friendly affair, you know, when it's something where like you have multiple generations doing deep healing work for kind of like these bigger issues than just our individual trauma, although obviously those things are interrelated, the environment of the ceremony changes. Like for those of you that have been in ceremony with your family, it's a very different dynamic when it's like a one-on-one healing experience with a person who's like trying to heal a specific thing, maybe even a sexual trauma. So I think that like, just to like loop all these pieces together, as psychedelics and medicine spaces and this healing work, I think, comes out of the underground and into more of a visible place. And honestly, it gets more ordinary. It's less like this weird thing that's in the shadows that has to stay away from like accountability mechanisms. And as we start to visibilize it, bring family and bring systems of accountability and visibility, it'll actually become safer for people to have these experiences because there'll be more eyes. Right now, as long as this work happens in the underground, like no one's going, or very few people are going to like our traditional law enforcement incarceration paradigm to like, you know, go after abusive people. And maybe they should, maybe they shouldn't. But right now there's no other system of accountability. So like, as we begin to visibilize, as our families come in, like if I'm in ceremony with my family, like my experience and the experience of even a person facilitating or a person coming in is going to be different. Of course, that doesn't save everything. I'm very aware that really dark things happen and really complex things happen even in family systems. So I'm not saying that it immediately makes it better and safe. But I think like this understanding of different perspectives will make a difference in how we see it. Right now, we still see this as underground work, and it's easier for people to commit abuse in the underground because they have no one paying attention to them. So I think that'll start to change.
Yeah. And I want to add that I think that what's really becoming more and more obvious to a lot of us dealing with trauma is that there need to be more sexual healing available to people. There need to be more environments that are professionalized, and there need to be more sexual healing. You know, I mean, in the people that I train, you know, there are some people who are specialized in sexual healing, and I tell you, I'm really glad. There are some people who are offering such a dimension of therapeutic approach And unfortunately, because sexual healing has a bad rap still, it doesn't look very professional or something. It means that the people are not really in integrity, or that they don't hold their sexual, whatever, erotic field. So they are doing, I mean, you know, the poor people offering sexual healing have a bad rap. And I think it's time to really, you know, rise them to their professional offering that is so important if we want to deal with trauma. Because someone coming to Mexico to deal with reawakening the Kundalini and their possible, you know, de-traumatized self, they need to continue some work, right? They need to continue some work with someone when they come back. And, you know, historically, I have sent people to continue their work with sexual healers. And that's really important. And I think that if those people were more legitimized and more appreciated and more brought center stage in the field of therapeutic healing, there might be less transgression happening.
Thank you so much for those very thoughtful answers. The question from Liliana, thank you again, Liliana, does also ask how we address these ethical issues as a community when sexual conduct is happening in healing settings that is inappropriate. And you both touched on the fact that you're hopeful that it will get better over time as things evolve and as the regulatory landscape evolves because of more eyes. Liliana brings up, though, that it sounds like someone might have been assaulted in a MAPS Canada study. I don't personally know about that.
I just sent in the chat the statement that MAPS made after that happened. Yeah, on a timeline wise, I do want to clarify that the MDMA Code of Ethics that we published was published after this particular incident. There was, up until this point, there was kind of the way that had operated was that the people who were working on the research were bound by whatever their own independent ethical obligations were, whether they were therapists or whatever else. And leading up to this, prior to this incident occurring, but also definitely partially as a result of it, like it became extremely clear that having an independent code of ethics for the therapy modality itself would be necessary, especially as we realized that other professional licensure requirements or other structures may not be sufficient. And frankly, we're not necessarily nuanced enough to engage with the ethical issues that come up while working with medicine, because they're very similar to ethical issues that come up outside of it, but often escalated or exaggerated because of the additional sensitivity that comes with people who are under the influence of something. So that's that absolutely is a thing that MAPS has been considering. And actually that particular press release has a link to our former code of ethics, and we actually updated it. We have a second edition that will be coming out in the MAPS bulletin this month or next month or in the very near future. So stay tuned, because there are a few changes that we updated our last ethical framework for. And that's something that we will be requiring all of our therapists from that point forward to be signing on to participate.
Thanks. Awesome.
So in answer to that, or addressing that topic, you know, I feel like any other form of healing work, therapy, you know, psychedelic therapy is, you know, led by human beings who are not all clear of their unconscious material, their boundaries, their wounding. And so I think that the necessity is to provide good mentors, good support system, a culture where the people who are sliding into a behavior that is not ethical can reach out to mentors and have a trusting environment in which they can really confide in and really find the support to stop before it's too late, you know, or to track what's going on before something really damaging happens. So I think there are ways to create a culture and not just a supervision culture, but a mentoring culture where every therapist, every psychedelic therapist, just like every therapist, right, a psychotherapist, has someone to go to and really disclose or talk or find support for whatever this fragility comes up. And then when there is a breach of trust, or when it's a breach of ethics, there are different ways. There are restorative justice. There are limitation to what a therapist could do or how they could act, and sort of maybe a probation time during which they would be required to do specific therapy and support the growth. I mean, that someone acts out is definitely out of ethic, and it's also a signal of some pain. It doesn't mean that the person is wounding everybody necessarily. It means there is a dynamic that shows up that's really that's out of boundary, out of ethics. A code of ethics is really important, but a code of restorative justice is as important as a code of ethics. What do we do with the people who are, in fact, touching into their shadow material, and which implies that the people dispensing psychedelics should always or ongoingly look at their own shadow material and ongoingly look at what takes place inside them, have the honesty and the humility to really look at what's happening. That's a culture also. That's a culture within the psychedelic field, yeah.
And I'll add two things to that. One, just because you're looking at your shadow doesn't mean that you get to act out as a result of it, because you can be aware of your bad behavior and still do it. And a lot of people, I think, are in that position where they're aware of it, but then they see themselves in this kind of like behavioral loop that they either can or frankly aren't willing to get out of. So I do think it's looking at the shadow, engaging with it, and then being in dialogue with it, and ideally having some sort of accountability, whether that's supervision or something else. And then I will say one quick thing about restorative justice, because I've been studying it and facilitating conversations for a very long time, and I'm very close to quite a few restorative and transformative justice communities. And one of the things I just want to flag, and I know that there's people in the audience who have probably experienced this before, but one of the things I just want to note about restorative justice is that it takes a lot more human resources than our current accountability structure. It's very simple to say this person did something wrong. We're going to have this like court of law decide what their punishment is, and then we're going to send them away for other people to deal with. The thing about restorative and transformative justice is that usually they're in the context of working within the container of a particular community. And the idea that you don't throw people away or exile people is really transformative and beautiful and powerful. And it takes a lot of time and energy. So having seen and participated like in and around and facilitated kind of conflict for quite a few years, both in this space and outside of it, one of the things I think people don't give enough credit for is how much time it actually takes to literally case manage, to actually like pay attention to who are the harmed parties, who are the people that caused harm, what are the dynamics there, what communities are each of them accountable to, who are the people that can be brought in, what it takes to get people to have a conversation, what kind of outcomes you want. My point is that punishment, like through incarceration, is actually quite a bit easier. So many people, I've seen this a lot, many people who believe that they believe in restorative justice, the second that an issue comes up, find that it actually takes a lot more patience and energy than we're used to, because we're so used to throwing people away. So I love restorative justice. I practice it. It's something I'm very, very personally passionate about. And I think it's really important we bring it in. But I think if we're talking about restorative justice without like other people in the community who are stepping up and willing to hold space for both parties or multiple parties, then it's just a dream. And I hate to say that because I want to just say that's the easier way, but I really feel like from my experience that if there aren't a lot of people, half a dozen or for a single conflict, people at least or more, that are able to spend a lot of time on the issue, then calling for restorative justice in the face of harm, usually just ends up putting everyone into this weird purgatory where they're like, is the issue solved? Is this person better? How have they demonstrated whether or not they're better? And those things are important, but it's just really critical that we think about the human labor cost, the time and energy it takes for people to hold that space, both for the person who's been harmed, which is its own space holding. And also we can talk a lot about transformative justice for people who've committed abuse and harm. But who makes that decision? Who allows them back in? Who are the gatekeepers to a community? So I think that these questions around how we structure and create both gatekeeping and permeability into a community is also really important, because that's also how you hold the boundary of how you hold safety or not.
Yeah, really good points there. It's hard work.
It's very hard work.
Yeah. Well, let's continue to weave worlds here with our next question on spirit and science from Steve Kruzaniski. How'd I do on your name? Steve, are you available and interested in coming on screen? In a few seconds. In 3, 2, 1. All right, I'm gonna, oh, he's trying. Let's give Steve maybe another 5 seconds on this.
Oh, this is a good question.
Mm-hmm. Okay, Steve, I think I might just take the reins here. So, oh wait,
Nice.
There you are. Hi, welcome.
Sorry about that.
No worries.
Calling in from Peru, so maybe slow.
Oh wow.
And you got my last name perfect. Thank you.
Yes.
Yeah, so I'm a Canadian veterinarian, but living in Peru. I'm new to this realm, but excited to join you and learn from you both at the Anka training next year.
Awesome.
But my question is looking at this intersection of spirit and science. So at the end of the conversation, I was hearing Maestra Eugenia discuss the importance of it, but I think for me, it's not completely clear, I guess. And if you have any comments on that, and I've seen some maybe new age spirituality, which may reject science or have a distrust for it. And on the other side, I think science sometimes has disrespected spirit. And so wondering if you can comment on where the boundaries of that are and maybe if you see a way forward. Thank you very much.
Yeah. It's interesting. And in my book, I talk about that, and I have a short little moment, but it comes back to me now where I say that, the Mazatec have looked at, for thousands of years, how these mushrooms really worked on people. And they have observed many, many, many treatments of many, many different kinds of afflictions and ailments and situations, both emotional and physical and medical in a way, spiritual, collective, and in a way, their observations have concluded that these mushrooms were, in fact, potent if worked in a certain way on that kind of affliction, or another way for that kind of situation. So they've done science, they've done observations, they've done collection of data, which is science, except it's not really called science because science is supposed to be, in a hospital with doctors having to study the physical realm and exploring the physical aspect of things. And the Mazatecs have concluded that for someone to really heal on a physical level, an emotional level, they in fact needed to heal on a spiritual level. So for them, the connection between what we call body and spirit, or body, mind, spirit, is not even it's the center of their treatment form. The doctoring is centered around connecting with the transpersonal space in order to alleviate the tensions that are locked in the body. Connecting with spirit, however we connect it with, may be earth, Gaia consciousness, or God, or great spirit, or spirit of the water, of the wind. Connecting with the spirit is such a reassuring environment that our entire emotional body, energetic body, and physical body unclenches. There is a release of fear that we hold. That's science. That is connecting spirit as a healer, or spiritual connectedness as a healing modality to the actual health of the physical self. And after years, people healing from very, very debilitated physical condition during their trip to Mexico, because they were immersing themselves into a culture that believed in that. They would do different ritual, and not just the mushroom ritual, by the way, and they would be immersed in a culture that totally supported and believed in the potency of healing as a holistic approach, not just as, I'm giving you this mushroom that's going to work on your brain, that's going to help. No, it's not like this. Healing is it's a bigger cycle and spiral of movement that happens in the body, in the energy, in the spirit, in the fact that those journeys are done in a collective, most often in Mexico, and on a land that people pray to. So the spirit of the lands are totally actors in this healing theater here. So the holistic, that's why my book is based on the 5 aspects, because the holistic model, the holistic multifaceted approach of healing is what the Mazatec really believe in. This is how healing takes place. The science, the spirit, this is like this. Now, what's very interesting as we speak now is that I am, in fact, one of the lead investigators in a FDA-approved research on psilocybin in Los Angeles, studying the effect of psilocybin on COVID-related grief. And this team is a team of physicians that have brought me in to be weaving the spiritual aspect or the holistic aspect of an approach with psilocybin in a scientific environment and research environment. So it's going to be very interesting to see in the actual context of a research project how these worlds can really come together concretely, right, in a science environment. What is the impact of a belief, of a holistic belief, of a spiritual belief in this medicine, of an experience of years like I have in a scientific environment, which has never happened so far. So I'm really interested to see what are the findings, what do we find, how do we apply, I'm sorry about the sound here, how do we apply this holistic, this dimension of the Mazatec tradition into a scientific environment. So I will report later.
Yes, please. I was going to say we should have another event after we get some learnings from that.
I can say a couple things about that. I love this question, and I'm grateful that you asked it. So, and I'll talk about it a little bit more macro, obviously, than the tradition that we're talking about specifically today. But so I was raised Muslim, and nowadays I like to say I practice Islamawaska. And this question about what's science and what's religion or spirituality has always been a really big one for me personally. And my father, who is a very devout, although I wouldn't say dogmatic Muslim, very kind of from a very young age taught myself and my brothers that science and spirituality could be in alignment, and that in fact they supported one another in the sense that spirituality gave rationalist science huge existential questions to engage with, and science provided information about the laws of our universe and how this particular material world works and how we can engage with it. But to me, there was literally never a contradiction. And although I know that, especially in the United States, there's a big discussion around what's one versus the other, and there's kind of this perception that like the church and science or religion and science are kind of at opposition to each other. I think that has a lot more to do with like political power dynamics over history than it does about whether or not science or religion are better than the other. I actually think it has more to do with like who controls which institutions and how they're leveraged throughout history. So as far as like, very practically speaking, like how this looks like here, I work at MAPS, which is a research organization that's focused primarily on clinical research, working within the confines of regulated systems, which are very flawed, which are very reductive, have extremely limited application, and yet are the way, because of the way that kind of our societal pendulum has swung from one end of like a highly animistic, pantheistic, relational framework into one that's highly reductive and rationalist and individualistic. I think that part of what's happening in this conversation about psychedelics as they come forward is kind of a weaving of this more rationalist and also this more animistic understanding. Like, is it possible for our understanding of physics and biology and chemistry to be in alignment with our understanding of the possibility that there is consciousness in all things, or consciousness in the way that we relate to all things? So I like that. What psychedelic medicine often gives us a chance to think about where these questions are, or which side of which these questions are. But on a personal level, I've been really trying to eradicate my commitment to the fallacy of rationalism and eradicate my own kind of bias from being, raised in an American kind of public school, education, which gave me so much, but also kind of like so many of us really fed this kind of conditioned understanding of what's real and what's not. But in the same way that I'll use a placebo effect example, not some people, the placebo effect, the whole idea about the placebo effect is that it doesn't actually matter what you're taking because your consciousness believes that something's happening and then it has an effect. From this perspective, I actually don't think it matters. I've heard the term called apatheism, where it's it doesn't matter whether or not there's some sort of ultimate truth here, because the reality is that people believe things, and those things that they believe cause them to behave in certain ways. So I think a lot about the tangible secondary effects of these belief systems, probably more than the truth of any single one. Because what is truth anyway, right? But actually, I'll just say maybe one last thing about this, which is very practical, and this is kind of a good example of what I'm describing, which is thinking about US law in relation to these issues. So right now, this psychedelic healing modality is bubbling up to the surface. And as you've heard Françoise say, as I'm sure many of you have heard, is this physiological healing? Is this spiritual? Is it both? Right now in the US, there's two paradigms. You're either a church or you're researchers and you're working in medicine. So if you're working in medicine and you're making spiritual claims, this study that you're talking about, Françoise, is super exciting. And there's Joe Tafur is working on a study about kind of intergenerational trauma and these more energetic pieces, because those things are kind of bringing a little bit of the spirit just bit by bit into science and the awareness of this other perspective. And at the same time, I think that there's a shift in the world of spiritual practice and spiritual healing that's also bringing in these issues around, or these questions around science and therapy and so on. So I do think that there is something to be said for both of these contexts to be learning from and melding with one another. But we are in a world where, in fact, right now, if you are a church and you're making medical claims, if you're a church saying that you can heal people, you're going to have a problem. If you're giving people a pharmaceutical medicine and you're saying that this will help you believe in God or not believe in God, you're having a problem. So we're working within the very limited, very early version of these human systems that we're working within, trying to help the systems around us evolve as fast as the rest of us are. But it's a slow process, and I think that psychedelics are one of the wedges into science to really open this up. But I do think that there has to be a mutual awareness that what we believe has very tangible impacts on our health, on our relationships, on our perceptions, the decisions we make. What's true or not, I think, is in many ways secondary to how we actually end up treating each other. So that's my kind of metaphysical response to that question.
No, that's great. That's great. And what comes to my mind immediately, between these two different options, right, of the medical science research and then the church, it's what's going on right now in Oregon, right? This is a breakthrough, or this is the third option. This is the middle way of having the possibility of actually weaving those worlds in a concrete manner by making psilocybin and mushrooms available to people who don't necessarily fit in a scientific research program and don't necessarily want to belong to a church either. And they want an experience that is going to be helpful, maybe not treating them, but certainly opening their perception to other aspects of themselves that then will lead to feel better in terms of their tendency to feel not depressed. We don't want to call it depressed, but whatever, low, or sad or lethargic. There's other words besides depression, in the dictionary, and our anxiety. We can use all kinds of different vocabulary that is kosher. and then we don't have to call about spirituality. We say, well, you have this experience and you see what happens, and here are the different possibilities and menus of the very different kind of things you can explore, and you see where you go. So there's no goal, there's no treatment goal, there's no enrollment to a spiritual dimension. And I'm really excited actually to see that area being an available available access to people. That's really the hope of really bridging those worlds in something neutral that is not necessarily belonging to any of them, which is a third party, so to speak.
Yeah. And by that third route, you mean like through policy, decriminalizing plant medicine and this sort of thing, making access available.
That's right.
Yeah, MAPS founder Rick Doblin likes to say that in an ideal world, psychedelics won't need priests or doctors, that you can just get them without having to go through a priest or a doctor. And I think that there's really important times where you want someone with medical care. There's some times where you really want someone who can do spiritual counseling. And there's some times where there's a lot of other times where you might want something else. So having that, like you said, Kat, like that third way, that's more about like adults making decisions about themselves independently of these larger structures, is part of the goal of like this bigger movement to decriminalize and legalize and create other kinds of access.
That's right.
Yeah. Awesome.
That's right. And I think that with that direction and reality that we are in right now is education, is information, is destigmatization, is having this happening today, right? These conversations that are really bringing this awareness to people that otherwise don't even know what psilocybin is, or don't even know a lot of this approaches, and making it, educating people on the existence and then the best handling and the best approach, so it is safe medically and psychologically, and it is not throwing people into places that is too overwhelming. So there's a lot of education. It's like driving a car. You need to learn to drive a car. You need to have someone next to you to drive a car. Well, it's the same thing. It's a tool. It's a thing to learn to use, and to have someone teaching you and holding your hand through it. It's a big tool. A friend of mine called it the power tool. It's a power tool. It can hurt you, right?
Yeah.
It's
I love that analogy
right?
with cars, where it has great potential.
That's right.
But it also has potential for great harm. So how do we do that?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah.
Great. Thank you for that wonderful question, Steve, and for the discussion here. We have lots more questions. So moving on from our power tool discussion to, we have a question from Chris W. on training guides and facilitators. Chris, are you interested and available to come on screen? I can ask it. Let's do it.
You can ask it. Okay.
Thanks for the fast response. So wondering what, Françoise and Izzy, how do you feel about how we train thousands of guides and facilitators in the next couple of years, getting ready for Oregon and more places treating people?
Well, I'll give it a shot, and then you can continue, because you have a whole different panel of it. So I happen to be on the advisory board in the Oregon Initiative, and I'm responsible, amongst other people with the team, to create the curriculum for the training that the facilitators will have to go through towards licensing and be able to be given the facilitator green light. So we are working diligently on creating a curriculum that is educational, that is creating ethics and care and intake and preparation, and how to navigate those states, and how to support the aftermath of such state. So there would be some screening, there would be some medical team involved, and there would be some psychological team involved. So that's what we are doing. I happen to have trained many psychedelic guides over the last 25 years. So I have expertise in training, and I know what constitutes good training. This is part of my specialty. So I've taken a lot of all my guides, I've taken them to Mexico, and we've done some work there, and we've done some a lot of lecture and different aspects of the training here in this country. So we can continue to do that and just prepare the facilitators for Oregon. Independently to that, I'm now about to launch an initiative to, in fact, create a training initiative in this country, and we are about to launch in about a week, to bring all my expertise or what I've been doing into a more scaled dimension. And we are talking to MAPS and USONA and different organisms who know us and know our reputation and skill to work together in a good way to support the scaling of the training of the guides. So, and of course, as we know, there are other places. USONA is training, MAPS is training, CIIS is training through the CPTR program certificate. So, there are different bodies. I know that Synthesis is going to be training guides as well. There are different organisms. ONCAR, of course, is training in South America. There are different organisms in Canada also who want to run training. So the good news is now we are in a place where the people who have intention to train guides, we are trying to create a collaborative pool of effort and ethics and approaches to have distinction and certainly specificity in the way we train, but also a commonality of what constitute good training. So this rolling out of all this initiative like Oregon or other places that train facilitators would be happening in a way that is safeguarding the future of this movement as it is going forward in a more public acceptance and public access. So we want the facilitators to be, or the guide, or how we call them, psychedelic therapists, to be really practiced in the work themselves, to have experiences, to have sat for people with mentors, so they have a way to watch someone work and observe mentors working, as well as, of course, having a whole body of information and education that have to do with safety, with behavior, with ethics, etc. So yeah, I'm very much involved in this field of education, indeed. Easy, you want to say about training?
Yeah, one of my favorite topics, actually. Thank you. That was awesome to hear you say, and I'm excited to hear. And I'll just actually maybe start where you sort of ended, where what's going on with Measure 109 is really interesting, and what happens in Oregon is going to be really interesting. And I'm excited about the possibility of how it's going to roll forward, and I'm more excited because you're involved, Françoise. I'm really glad to hear that you're participating in that conversation. And I mean, just the reality is that there's going to be a huge amount of need of good training. I think figuring out where the medicine comes from will, those are issues that people will slowly but surely start to figure out in different directions, whether it means moving more towards synthetics or figuring out how to cultivate and these different kind of options. But the capacity and expertise of space holding is not something you can just like grow out of the ground. You have to practice it and have experience. And I'll just say, for MAPS, we realized about 2 years ago that training therapists was probably going to be our biggest bottleneck, because MDMA is a synthetic molecule. It's something that can be manufactured at large scale. It's not something that necessarily needs to be harvested, but the actual facilitation is a whole other kind of ballgame. And to the point earlier about kind of sexual ethics, one of the early decisions that was made with the MDMA therapy protocol was having 2 therapists or 2 practitioners sit, present for the person, and to make sure that there was like a way that there was some sort of diet. Obviously, that doesn't work every time, but it works a lot of the time to actually create a little bit more of a safe container for people. And it means that you usually need twice as many people or twice as many people trained in whatever modality. So one interesting thing about Measure 109 that I really like, and one of the things we're going to see in Oregon that's very different, I'll just give a spectrum. So for MAPS's phase 2 and from MAPS's phase 2 trials, the way that the facilitation was done was such that one of the 2 people had to have a therapist license, a therapy license, and the other person could be in training. They didn't have to be licensed. They could be like a student or something along those lines. And in some ways that's really cool, because what that means is that you have relatively lower professionalization, which means that the cost is lower and it's easier to find people and more people can do it. Measure 109 does a really good job of this, because to be a facilitator in Oregon, you actually only need a high school diploma. So although you will have to go through a process of seeing if you're physiologically contraindicated by a medical provider, the facilitators can be anyone with a high school diploma or up. And I think that's really exciting personally, because I don't think you need a PhD to hold space. And, FDA has been asking MAPS, and for phase 3, we've been asked by FDA to shift from having one licensed practitioner to one unlicensed person, maybe a student, to having someone with an MD and or a PhD, and ideally both. And I don't know how many MD PhDs y'all know, but they're not always like the most people-centered person. No offense to my amazing MD PhDs out there. But I'm just saying that there isn't necessarily a correlation between higher education and capacity to hold space. There's lots of people who are not formally educated who are incredible space holder, and vice versa. So I just say that because we know it's a bottleneck, and one way to make it easier is to make it so more people can get trained. That's super exciting. The scary thing, or I should say the flip side to that, is about this question about accountability. The thing about having licensed providers and board oversight is that if something goes wrong, there's someone that they're accountable to. There's actually like a body that can be reported. What's going to happen in Oregon is that the Oregon Health Authority, OHA, is going to be making its own board specifically for these facilitators. And for those of you in the audience, there's going to be a bit of a differentiation. So people who have therapy licenses will be able to be trained facilitators and offer psychedelic therapy, but also people who are not licensed therapists will be able to learn to have psilocybin facilitation. So we've been using the word services as kind of like psilocybin services as the umbrella, of which therapy is part. So just want to make that distinction, because as we're talking about medicalizing and like who has access to the training and so on one level, the easier it is for people to get trained, it's a livelihood. It's people who are here to hold space. There's lots of people I know in the space who are like, damn, I really wish I didn't have to take this fintech job. Like, it'd be really nice if I could just hold space for people, and that's a thing that I think will be possible in the future, which is really exciting. And maybe I'll just end with this tension between urgency and need. Many people, including myself, who started in the underground, whatever you want to call it, like my early psychedelic experiences were friends holding space for friends. Like, it's peer-to-peer work. And that's something that I think is a huge part of how many people are introduced to this medicine. And not everyone is going to have like a super skilled, very capable guide working with them. But I think this is the difference when we start working with institutions and systems. If we're working with the state of Oregon or with the FDA or with these major institutions with lots of resources and money, it's really important that that there's quality control, that there's training, that there's accountability. And to Françoise's point, the more we all get educated about it, the easier it'll be for people to hold space for each other. Now, the law may take longer to catch up to that, and I'm not saying that, peer-to-peer support is the same thing as working with a guide. It's not. There's definitely a difference there. But there's a huge urgency. It's really hard for me to see my friends who are suffering and be like, wow, we're still 2 years away from FDA approval. Damn, it really sucks that we have to follow all these rules, isn't it? Like, it really sucks that we're gonna have to wait all this time to train people to get it. So I get the urgency. Like, I have friends that are overdosing. I have friends that are, that are dying by suicide. Like, I see and I recognize that we want to help each other. Like, why don't we just, so finding this balance between quality control, the quality of care, and responding to the urgency of need is a really hard one. And that's the tension that I feel like we're in between. How do we bring forward people to create, hold the space for people to be supported without losing sight of the many power dynamics and the harms and the risks that we were talking about earlier and the ones we haven't talked about yet. So we're going to have to figure out how to do it. But I think it's both training more therapists and also increasing the capacity of people within the community to hold space for and with one another.
Wonderful. Thanks for this.
Yeah, I think that the Cream movement is really providing the capacity of people to own some medicine and to, use it, right? I mean, this is what the Cream is about. You can have something, you can use it, and so that accompanied with some good education and safe measure, safety measure is a good access to people. And then, the Oregon template, I call it now, the Oregon template is really a possibility for creating education to the PhD and the MDs who don't necessarily know how to handle psilocybin at all. And then the people who are lay, we call, right? Who are, good people wanting to help, creating for them a specific baseline of education that would provide them with the confidence to hold space, even if something goes a little bit intense, right? So they would have that's exactly what we're doing now. Like, what needs to be the criteria of a good training? And we are exactly creating that now in the committee. So we will provide that to the OHS, and we will advise the OHS at what a good training should look like. And then we are in the middle of all this creation right now, in fact. So we are like working hard on this. But this is the point. The point is to educate people who are not therapists and are not doctors and are not PhDs to have the capacity to access a training that creates enough education and enough body of confidence, right, and practice, so then they can go forward and hold space for other people in a way that they feel is supported and overseen. And then there is all this decree measure that creates access to people for medicine and what they do with that, right? in a free world, so to speak. Right? So,
Great.
Yeah.
So much potential.
It's
for
very exciting. It's a very exciting moment for sure. Yeah, exactly.
In a way, it's almost like it's a nice problem that the training is the problem, because it seems that there's a lot of interest in people becoming healers and facilitators, right? And so it's about how do we meet that demand and interest, rather than, does anyone want to do this work? We have so much interest in doing that work. So love that the frameworks are opening that opportunity.
Definitely.
All right. Yeah. I think we have time for one more question. Unless this one goes by really quickly or something, but I'm loving the depth of the answers we're getting. So probably one more question. The top voted one that remains is from Megan. I'm just going to go ahead and read it here. Can you speak to the experience of the efforts of elder women worldwide in creating an organic model of how we weave the wisdom held worldwide in support of the events occurring here stateside in the evolution of psychedelic healing?
Well, because the scientific model and the political framework have been held by men, historically speaking, women have had little voice in the field of science and in the field of political measures. That's changing, as we know, and I'm glad this is changing. There is a different solidarity that is inherently present amongst women because maybe of being oppressed for so many centuries. There is a solidarity amongst oppressed people that is part of being oppressed, and that's true also for people of color. Of course, I'm talking about women here, but I'm not.
Sorry to interrupt. Megan did add in the chat here that they're referring to 13 Indigenous women and their meetings and the grandmothers. So I don't know if you want to add more nuance to that.
Yeah, because I was very much part of that, because my teacher was one of the 13 Indigenous grandmothers in that council. So I'm very aware of it. So I feel like as women, we have been, like I said, bonded by through oppression, which is, a way to bond. And now we are claiming some more voices. And I certainly feel in my life, I have been lucky to be supported by men and women like Julieta, but also some interesting people in the field. Ralph Metzner, or Rick even is not an elder to me, but a man in the field, and Fadiman, and the Shulgins. I've been really fortunate to know people who have totally felt like, you can do this, go ahead, and empowering me in their own ways. And so I've always considered men very much part of my support system in some strange way. But now that we are women taking a voice more and taking a role in the political arena and in the psychedelic field, thank God to the Women in Psychedelic movement with Bia Labate, whom I thank here for her action and presence in mobilizing and gathering women together. It reminds me, yes, Megan, to this important example that the Council of 13 Indigenous Grandmothers showed the world. And that was a very interesting movement. So for about 13, 14 years, these women of different indigenous tradition met. They gathered in 2004, upstate New York, at the Menla Retreat Center. And there were women from the Lakota traditions, from the Nepalese tradition of the Boon tradition, from Tibet, from South America and the Daime tradition, from Central America and the Maya tradition, from the Cheyenne tradition, the Hopi tradition, the Mazatec tradition. And they all, I hope I didn't forget anyone, and they all gathered together and formed a council. And the council was about how women from different indigenous practices come together, listen to each other, accept each other, pray to each other's prayers, and form a movement that is cohesive and it is not competitive, and that is weaving together all these different voices from different angles of the indigenous prayers tradition. It was a very beautiful movement. I was lucky enough to be there on the onset with Carol Mosley Brown and Alice Walker and Tenzin Palmo and wonderful people who were on the head of it, and traveled with the grandmothers to India and New Mexico and Mexico. We hosted them with Julieta and I, and my good friend also who helped me organize that. And so we were in this weaving, and it was really interesting to see grandmother Tsering, this grandmother from Tibet, a friend of His Holiness the Dalai Lama, very, very, very much in the Tibetan lineage, come to Mexico and take mushrooms to be able to pray with Julieta, even though, there's no drug consuming in Tibetan Buddhism, but she didn't consider that a drug. She considered that a prayer. It was her sister's prayer. So she took the mushroom with Julieta in her ceremony room and prayed all night in her tradition and connected with the divine in her own way. And then we had the Daime people taking the mushroom, and we had the peyote roadmen taking the mushroom and singing, and being in the place of the ceremony. And Julieta would take the ayahuasca with the grandmothers, in their church ceremony, and et cetera, right? And it was very interesting to see how they would each come together in a prayer. And I think that as women, we are now inspired by that movement to listen to each other. We have the scientists, we have the psychologists, we have the doctors, we have the ritual people, we have the indigenous people, the women of color, we have the elders, the younger, and we can come together. It doesn't matter really. We can come together and listen to each other as a movement. And it's true in the women movement around psychedelic now. And it's true in a larger scale as a psychedelic movement. How do we come forward now in this weaving of the worlds, in including people, in making sure everybody has access to the medicine, making sure the different communities of color have access to the medicine, making sure people who are suffering have access to the medicine, no matter how much money they can pay, and making sure that as people, as a humanity, we can hopefully transcend our color and our tradition and our background, like the grandmothers did, and put that forward in the psychedelic movement at large, bringing the science and the spirituality and the churches and the access of the cream and the access in Oregon, or the research in Canada, or what's possible in Jamaica, all in the Netherlands, all together as a movement. That's what interests me, coming from this example of the grandmothers and the women in psychedelic movement now. How do we use that as a template to really unify the field without getting drowned and standardized? How can we keep our voices and yet be together? That for me is the inspiration from the Grandmothers Council and from the women in psychedelic and the people of color movement, and like that, right? What's the message of each movement, right? Is that we can't ultimately, the psychedelic movement is an invitation to come together, I think.
Thank you so much.
Izzy?
So
what comes to you, Izzy, when you think about people coming together. I mean, here you are, you're a people of color person, and you come with this movement, which is essentially white male dominated. And so what is it like to come together?
I was thinking about your answer, and I really appreciate you checking in about that, because I was thinking about what you were saying at the end around unity. And I'm also looking at this question that Leah Friedman asked around, because I think it's related. And I'll just read it because maybe I'll close by just like answering, kind of like weaving that in, because I think they're related.
Sure. Yeah.
Leah asked, when Izzy asked about what people should know as this movement progresses and more people get involved, Eugenia spoke of respect, love, and peace. How do we account for the unfortunate fact that so many of us are without mentors, elders, and resilient, equitable models for society? How can we be sure we are interpreting these truths in integrity and not being driven by unconscious conditioning or ego, etc.? So when I was thinking about what you were saying, Françoise, I was thinking about unity. And I like a lot what you were saying. And I feel from a movement building perspective, figuring out how all of these different pieces fit together makes a lot of sense. And I love that instinct. And I love actually this tension between like unity consciousness and like the issue, the dark, historical issues of historical justice and social justice and oppression, historical oppression that we're engaging with. It's like, it's hard. It's like, how are we all one, but also have these issues? That's like a really big inquiry that I think we're in socially and as a society. But my question is, and I think to kind of answer that with a question is like, what is the unity for? Like, why are we unifying to do this? Like, I don't think that many of us, or I would not say that I'm doing this just so I'm not trying to create more access to psychedelics for the sake of the psychedelics, right? I think that for me, at least, the purpose of unity, this purpose of bringing these things together is for something bigger than that, of which the psychedelic modalities are a tool to get there. And like, that's the same with healing. You're not like you said earlier, Françoise, you don't like take the medicine, this is going to do a thing to your brain and then you'll be better. Like, no, there's actually, what it does is that it opens things or closes things or adjusts things or balances you out. So then over time you can reach a place that's more in alignment with whatever your your most aligned state is. So that, when I think about like society, especially, I was taught in my early education around shamanic practice and healing and animistic healing modalities was really focused on this idea of balance and bringing balance back to systems. So I was taught when in my healing path and in my journey toward learning healing practices, that the facilitator, the curandera or shaman, whoever they are, so much of what they're doing is achieving balance, re-achieving balance. And I think when I think about the goal of these, like, why do we want more people to take psychedelics? Like, why are we trying to create systems that make it easier? Like all of these pieces. Of course, there's like the justice aspect, like no one should be criminalized for what they put in their own body. Like that's an obvious one. But what's the bigger purpose of creating these systems so people can get access in an easier way to these states? And to me, it comes down to this. Like, I think that for those of us that are seeking balance in an unbalanced world, in a paradigm that has gone out of balance in so many ways, whether it's out of balance with nature, out of balance with sexuality, out of balance with our family, like these are all things that I don't think the psychedelics solve those problems. They help people get closer to their inner water level, to their own inner water level, so then they can support balance around themselves. And maybe for me, I think of myself as a person who's doing this healing work on systems. Like for me, I think on a systemic level, we are working with very ill systems that we either conceived out of a desire to oppress, or systems that have been so corrupted and perverted that they cause more harm than they help. So in my mind, like our issues with politics are not so different from an out of balance body, an immune system that's out of balance, a cultural immune system that's out of balance. So for me, I'm like thinking like, why are we doing this? Like, why do I care if people take more psychedelics or do this or that? And I think, and going back to this question about the indigenous grandmothers and to Leah's question about elders, like, I think that not having eldership, and you've heard that quote, like not every older person is an elder. And like not having eldership, not having mentorship, not having those things, to me, is a symptom of being out of balance. So we don't, it's true, we don't have a lot of those things. And we are theoretically trying to build them. But one of the things that I like to remember, especially with this conversation around the Indigenous grandmothers and around Indigenous practices, as someone who identifies as a person with interrupted Indigenous lineage, right? Like I have an identifiable Indigenous ancestry, but was not raised in that context. So I can't, and I don't claim that. But I'm like, there's so many of us who are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 10 generations removed away from that Indigenous consciousness. And again, like, what's the purpose? And to me, it's not like reaching back into the past and like going back to, I like that I'm reaching to this piece of art that has like the medicine. But it's like, we're not just reaching back. It's actually like, we're reaching in both directions. This is the idea of also reaching forward. And when I think of like, what's the purpose? It's that I want my children and my children's children and the children 7 generations ahead of me to be living in a world that is in balance. I can't even imagine what that looks like right now, because we have so many generations of being out of that balance. But I feel like if we're bringing forward the medicine and it just helps people find their own inner equilibrium, and then they bring that forward, yeah, we're still gonna have to deal with capitalism. We're still gonna have to deal with bureaucracy. That's all part of our, out of whack system. But I think that those pieces, to me, achieving that balance is like a core kind of undercurrent, forward looking.
Yeah.
Thank
you. Yeah,
absolutely. No, I'm totally. No, absolutely. I mean, the balance is the core issue. I think that when I'm talking with about unity, what comes to me is that for me, in my own psychedelic experiences and the mushrooms specifically, what I've learned, because that's my lineage, what I've learned is like, this is the unity principle. We are really one. We are really one consciousness expressing itself in different ways. So the pool of unity, the pool of what fuels us is the same. That's what I've seen. That's what I've understood, that we are fundamentally united and our expression is distinct. So if we remember that you are me and I am you, then the balance on a society level can hopefully be more not achieved, but walk towards.
Right.
So the place where it starts, I want to get balance. And that's what I'm trying to do, balancing my life and balancing my speech and my intention. And where does it start? It starts in a place of love. Like Eugenia said, it's about love and it's about respect and it's about intention of being together, right? Of being a collective together. And so that's unity for me. That's unity based in balance and in love. Yeah. So those are important fundamental psychedelic teachings that, what do we learn with psychedelics? We learn fundamentals. We learn an ethic. We learn what we're about on a core level, right? So how do we then live our life according to those teachings? Huh? So this is a work.
Yeah. Thank you both so much. I'd love to close.
Well,
I'd love to close this sort of Q&A with a quote that I might not have in exact word for word, but Izzy said something at the end of the interview, which really stuck with me. So beautiful, which was, "May the webs that we weave take the suffering and transform it into peace." I think that really just captures a lot of the sentiment that was expressed here today and also in that video, which feels so relevant, even though it was recorded in February before a lot of things happened this year.
Yeah, we're not even wearing masks in that, Françoise. Like, I saw it and I was like, whoa, like, is this safe?
Whoa.
And so,
I know, right?
Yeah. So I think
that pre-mask.
Yeah, it really speaks to how powerful the messages are that you've been discussing here, and I really appreciate. I think I can say on behalf of everyone who joined here today and those who will watch this later, thank you so much for taking the time to share and be here with us, Françoise, Izzy, Psychedelic Seminars background tech team to make this happen. And for those of y'all who want to continue connecting with each other, we do have that Air Meet that's just been posted in the chat. So feel free to click there, and I will see you there. Yeah, we'll close with kind of joint gratitude here. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Kat, for being such a fantastic facilitator and moderator. And thank you all to everyone for asking amazing questions. Obviously, we didn't get to all of them, but we will never get to all of them. So we're doing our best.
We'll come back together. We'll do this again someday.
Exactly.
We'll be back. We'll be back.
Exactly.
Thank you, everyone. It was a
Thanks,
pleasure.
everyone.
Thank you so much. Thank you.